Hello and welcome to this round 13 of Grand Prix Prague. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Hall of Famer Frank Karsten, and we've got the 8th ranked player in the world, finalist at the Pro Tour 25th anniversary, Martin User. He's playing Hollow One this weekend, up against the humans list in the hands of Teau Meri, and we're going to kick things off on Martin User's side of things. There's a lot of powerful things he can do on turn one, and we mentioned it in the lead-in, a Burning Inquiry here. So there's 2 Hollow Ones currently in hand for Martin User. Each of these players are going to draw 3 cards and then discard 3 at random. This is one that can feel really harsh if you're on the receiving end of it, because potentially, if they end up being lands discarded, you can find yourself with a hand that's very difficult to play with. And if it ends up that there's some Hollow Ones in play as well, this could be absolutely devastating for User. 1, 2, 3 cards going to the graveyard. One Hollow One. Also a Bloodghast going to the graveyard, though. They're not too bad.
Yeah, it could be worse.
A land going to the graveyard on the other side of things. So
looks like Meri is still left with a reasonable collection of lands and spells.
And just the 1 Hollow One coming into play off that Burning Inquiry. So it could have been worse for Meri quite easily. He can even see how much worse as the other Hollow One just sort of checks things out from the graveyard there.
Yeah, this is still a great start for Martin, of course. This deck is built to exploit all of these draw and discard effects with various creatures like Hollow One. You see also Flameblade Adept and Gurmag Angler to fill up the graveyard. Now, it is fairly consistent. It doesn't happen too often that you blurt out 2 Hollow Ones on turn 1. That only happens, let's say, 3 or 4% of the time. We had a chance to see it here, didn't actually get there, but generally speaking, you can expect to play 1 Hollow One by turn 2 in about 40 to 45% of the games, depending on your mulligan strategy. And no land for Martin, though.
Yeah, if that's the case, this could be a little awkward. The Bloodghast would love for him to play a land on this second turn.
Well, he still has access to Tessigur, but to play it, he'll have to exile the Bloodghast. That's probably still worth it. Just passing the turn with 8 power on the battlefield. Still not too bad on turn 2.
And I guess that against humans, the amount of removal that's going to get deployed by that deck not necessarily as high as you might see in some other matches.
The big question is going to be whether Meri has Reflector Mage. If he can play Reflector Mage to bounce the Tessigur in particular, that will get him back on the board very quickly.
So Cavern of Souls, all of these Cavern of Souls, of course, naming human. Then Champion of the Parish and a Meddling Mage. We'll find out what the Meddling Mage named soon enough. I guess that one of the worries for Hollow One is once something like a Champion of the Parish gets up to being a 5/5 or bigger, it does kind of blank a lot of the ground creatures that Hollow One is able to deploy.
So it looks like Meri named Lightning Bolt. I'm a bit surprised, because I think if Martin had Lightning Bolt on turn 2, he would have used it to kill the Noble Hierarch instead of playing Tessigur, given that there was such a risk of just running into a Reflector Mage. But, well, at least if Martin draws any new Lightning Bolts, then that will work out.
All right, Burning Inquiry number 2. The first one did all right for Martin User. Let's see how this second one performs for him. 3 cards going to the graveyard. Well, Flamewake Phoenix, that's not a card that you mind discarding too terribly much.
No, you're actually happy to have it in the graveyard rather than in hand.
3 lands going to the graveyard for Meri. That means that he's likely to have action left in his hand at this point. Looks like there's, 3 creatures in there, including at least 1 Militia Bugler. And there's a land for User. Let's see what he's going to be able to do with it. Burning Inquiry, one of those cards that, at the point that it was printed in M10, there was a little bit of talk about maybe whether or not it was going to be able to do something cool with Waste Not, a community design card that was also in the set, but didn't really see a huge amount of constructed play for quite a long while.
No, it wasn't until about a year ago Hollow One and Flameblade Adept were printed, and people really found a good use for it. Yeah, the only way to really break the card disadvantage of the card is to exploit it with discard triggers or cards that get better whenever you are discarding cards. But also by playing a bunch of creatures like the Flamewake Phoenix that are better when they are in the graveyard.
So some big attacks here coming from Martin User, swinging in for a full 10 points of damage here.
Teau has access to the possibility of double blocking Hollow One to keep his life total high, but that would be kind of a bad trade, trading 2 creatures for 1 card. And the Champion of the Parish will become bigger, almost surely on this turn.
Yeah, essentially the humans deck operating at sorcery speed, putting lots and lots of humans into play. And I think that as this deck came to the forefront, suddenly we started to learn quite how many great creatures there are that have the creature type human that have been printed in the last 15 or so years.
Yeah, and this deck has access to lots of 5-color lands, so you can incorporate all of the best humans printed in, well, pretty much the last decade, including Mantis Rider.
Yeah, Mantis Rider coming in, attacking him with flying, haste, and vigilance, and +1/+1 thanks to the Exalted trigger on Noble Hierarch. So this is a pretty close race we've actually got going on here, and Martin User, while he got off to an early good start getting creatures in play, he now finds himself, if he wants to attack, facing a reasonable set of blockers here.
If he attacks with all 3 creatures, then the obvious blocks for Mary are to block the Phoenix with Mantis Rider, double block Tessiger with the Champion and the Meddling Mage, maybe jump block the Hollow One with Noble Hierarch, especially if he wants to play around, say, the threats of Collective Brutality. Well, now he just has to do that, otherwise he dives to the Hasted Bloodghast, because Mary is at 10 life or below.
We said that this might be a matchup where we were going to see some blocking, and lo and behold, that's what we find ourselves with here. One of those things that it's a mainstay of Limited, making sure that you can navigate the combat step well, but there are definitely constructed decks that can do a pretty good job of completely avoiding that element of the game.
This is also a nice angle by Mary, not trying to trade for any of the big creatures that are attacking, but potentially trying to set up a lethal attack on the swing back. Because if he blocks like this, then all of his 3 trees will survive. He'll survive the attack at 2 life, and he currently has 8 power on the battlefield. If he plays 2 humans to grow the Champion of the Parish, or maybe just Atalia's Lieutenant, that would also be enough. Mantis Rider would be enough. Phantasmal Image. Now I'm not sure. Does he have just a bunch of militia booglers in hand? Because that doesn't necessarily get him there yet. Ooh, and a huge play from Martin. A jump blocker, that Flameblade Adept. That will make it much more likely that he can survive the next attack.
Yeah, the Bloodghast that came back with the land coming into play was not going to be enough to block, because that's a key line in its text. However, Flameblade Adept at this stage in the game will do a perfectly reasonable job of just standing in the way of whichever ground creature at least chooses to attack in here.
And now Mary is suddenly in a tough spot. I don't think he can set up a lethal attack here, so he has to go into defense mode.
Well, Militia Bugler will find him something good to work with for next turn.
And defense mode might be dangerous against the Menace ability on Flameblade Adept. If Martin manages to discard anything, right, Burning Inquiry, Goblin Lore, Faithless Looting, even cycling a Hollow One, then Mary will have to double block the Flameblade Adept. Otherwise that threatens to be lethal. And then he only has 2 blockers left, whereas Martin has 3 other attacking creatures.
Well, there's also a Flamewake Phoenix in the graveyard from last turn.
And that should be enough then already. Yeah, and then Goblin Lore boosting the Adept. I think this will be a lethal attack.
Goblin Lore, another card that didn't see a massive amount of play for a long while, but fits absolutely perfectly in this Hollow One deck. There were a lot of people suddenly jumping toward their trade binders to see whether or not they had any copies of this common, originally printed in Portal 2nd Age, I think it was, when it came out.
Yeah, it's a card that has been around for a long time. Got reprinted in a core set at some point, I believe. And here, well, it should set up lethal for Martin Juza. Juza has actually found some success with humans as well at previous modern events. 2 days ago, the Friday before the Grand Prix, he was trying to decide between Hollow One and humans. He felt that both were, well, both had some advantages and both had some disadvantages. He wasn't really quite sure which one to pick. In the end, well, he had already promised the other deck to a friend of his, and that friend told him, well, I actually prefer to play humans. So, well, he just used that as a tiebreaker and opted to register the Hollow One deck. So far, it has been working out quite well for him.
Yeah, not necessarily too surprised to see Martin User looking for one of the more aggressive decks in the format. It's the sort of thing that if you come out to Martin at the end of almost any draft and say, oh, how did your deck turn out? He'll show you a relatively aggressive deck. Because he sort of, it's not that he has one speed in his playing, but he definitely has a preferred strategy, and he likes being aggressive in matchups where he's able to.
Yep. Also, in a format like Modern, it definitely rewards you for being proactive. Without a card like Force of Will to stifle any opposing combos, many of the most played Modern decks are linear, proactive, aggressive, focused, and I think I would classify both humans and Hollow One in that category. It just is well suited for the format, where trying to play a deck that answers opposing things can be difficult when there are so many viable archetypes to choose from.
And another consideration potentially for some players, I know certainly for myself when thinking about Grand Prix, is the amount of value that you place on downtime between rounds. If you're playing a deck like Hollow One, for good or for ill, a large proportion of the time you're going to get through your rounds a little bit more quickly than perhaps some of the slower to win the game control decks. And when that's the case, it means that you suddenly are able to recenter, refocus, make sure you get a bit of water, maybe some food somewhere in the mix, just so that over the course of a long Grand Prix weekend, you don't find yourself in the latter stages when it's most important really struggling to just go through the motions.
Well, speaking of the later stages of a Grand Prix tournament, Martin Juza is no newcomer to competing in the top 8. In fact, I believe he is the all-time leader in terms of number of Grand Prix top 8s lifetime. He has as many as 30 to his name. So
just an incredible number.
Yeah, also has had a great season this current year, currently ranked number 8 in the top 25. So yeah, he can be easily considered to be the end boss in a Grand Prix event. The person that when you see his name on the pairings board on the same line as your own name, well, you know you're in for a tough match.
But equally, you know that if you get to beat Martin User at a Grand Prix, then that probably signals that you are running a little bit hot, doing well, and have every reason to think you can take that a little bit further.
Yep.
So these guys just shuffling up for Game 2. In Game 2, it's going to be humans on the play. It was Hollow One on the play in Game 1. How important is the play versus the draw in a matchup like this one, Frank?
It is. Well, in almost every matchup in Modern, it is important. But this is a matchup that can easily come down to a damage race. That is also what we saw in the previous game. And then being able to put the first creatures onto the table is going to be a big advantage. Mary will definitely have a good chance at curving out and putting Juza on the back foot before Juza has a chance to deploy all of his powerful Hollow Ones. And for a Modern, Modern is a non-rotating format, nearly 15 years of cards. I am still amazed at how much innovation is taking place. Just these two decks, there were people playing with some of the draw discard cards. There were some people trying to get there with Champion of the Parish and Talia's Lieutenant, but ultimately it was some newly added cards that propelled these archetypes into the competitive stratosphere.
Yeah, I think it'd be fair to say that neither of these decks existed 2 years ago.
At least not competitively, yeah.
All right, so players just checking out their opening 7s. An Ether Vial in hand for Mary here, which means that he will be able to jump out the gates a little bit, get more creatures on the board a little bit sooner.
One of the better 1-drops for the human deck.
Looks like he's got quite a lot of lands as well, though. On the other side of things, there is a Hollow One. There's, I think, 2 copies of Goblin Lore there.
That should be a decent start, but it looks like Martin does not have any play on turn 1. So if he keeps this, it is going to be a little slow, which is especially a problem when you are going to be on the draw. But he does have the tools to put out a Hollow One on turn 2.
And he drew into a Flame-Bladed Adept there as well.
That's one of the best cards you could draw with that particular hand.
Yeah, threatening a lot of damage with that. And with an Ether Vial on turn 1 from his opponent, that means that the likelihood of a double block being possible on the Menace creature goes down just a little bit.
Meanwhile, Mary's hand indeed does not seem great. Lots of land, so it is a very mana-heavy hand if you also include the Ether Vial. May come down to whether Mary can draw something to add to his board on the next turn to get the pressure on.
Picks up Thalia's Lieutenant.
That's a good start.
And it's a very good creature. It's not a very good creature on its own, though. Going to need a little bit of help there, perhaps.
Well, the entire deck helps.
There is Ether Vial, originally from Darksteel. Quite a lot of powerful cards from Mirrodin block, all told, it must be said. This one doesn't necessarily need lots of other artifacts knocking around to be at full potency, though. It took a long while for Ether Vial to find a really solid shell in Modern. It was one of those cards that when Modern was first announced, I kind of made a little list of really powerful cards in the hope of trying to get a jump on building decks. And Ether Vial was on that list for a long time before really hitting the mainstay of Tier 1 decks.
Well, even in Mirrodin block, when it was released, I remember testing for the Mirrodin block Pro Tour, where most people had an affinity type deck, but it took the genius of someone like Zvi Moshevitz to actually add Ether Vial to the strategy, which was extremely good in the deck. But many people dismissed Ether Vial at first, saying, well, it's slow, it's on the land, doesn't really do as much. But, well, currently it is one of the better cards in Modern. Holo 1 discarded there. That is some bad news for Martin Juza fans.
Any more that he has in hand, perhaps? We'll find out in one moment. I'm sure that he won't leave it too long before he plays one out if he has one. This Flame-Bladed Adept gets to attack in for a lot here, and with Menace it's not blockable, but no extra plays there from Martin Juza. Just has to pass things back. Burning Inquiry, Holo 1, and a Faithless Looting discarded to that Goblin Lore.
You do have to accept the randomness and don't lose your heart when you have to discard the Holo 1 with this deck.
And when Holo 1 first showed up, I remember having a conversation because Ken Yukihiro played it to a top 8 finish at the Pro Tour, and even in the coverage room, sort of talking to Luis Scott Vargas about this list, none of us were 100% on where the variance fell with it, whether or not this was Yukihiro maybe getting a little bit lucky. But when we heard that so many of Team Masashi had decided that they wanted to play this deck, we thought, well, you know what? These guys know what they're doing. They've probably figured something out here.
There is absolutely some variance in how the deck plays out. But if you look at the expected value, I mean, you can just run the numbers, do the math, and calculate all the probabilities. Then, well, on the whole, the Holo 1 deck is consistent enough. And is currently one of the top tier Modern archetypes.
Okay, Fatal Push to deal with Thalia's Lieutenant before that one can get too out of control.
But does Martin have anything else to add to the board here? Because a single Flameblade Adept is not going to raise a Mantis Rider.
There's a Grim Lavamancer to work with here, maybe.
That is, well, it's something he can play, but it's going to be slow.
Another Goblin Lore. All right, let's roll a dice. If nothing else, this will mean that this Flame-Bladed Adept again able to attack for a lot. Though this time with the Ether Vial in play, there's at least the potential for a double block here. Okay, Grim Lavamancer, Tasigur, and a land going away.
I guess when you just keep playing Goblin Lores and maybe also flashing back to Faithless Looting in the graveyard, a Flameblade Adept can technically raise Mantis Rider.
Yeah, I mean, the life totals are 12 apiece right now. We knew that there was a lot of land in the future for Mary here. He cashes in that Horizon Canopy for an extra card. 2 Ancient Ziggurat. They can only tap for creatures, but that not a big worry. But Ether Vial creating a second Mantis Rider could be quite a substantial worry for Martin Juza. He's now in a position where if he passes the turn, he is facing 6 more damage in the air, and I don't know how much he's going to be able to do about those creatures.
Yeah, Mary suddenly turned a 4-turn clock into a 2-turn clock. And, well, Juza either has to win on this turn, which seems extremely difficult, though might be technically possible with his deck with, I don't know, Burning Inquiry and then Triple Bolt or something crazy. Or he'll have to set up some defense against the Mantis Riders. either by finding removal spells for them or maybe playing a post-combat Flamewake Phoenix, but that will only prolong the inevitable. Yeah, well, Flamewake Phoenix, by playing it in second main phase, means that it is available as a blocker, but it will only be a jump block, and not even that, it looks like.
Yep, Reflector Mage enough to clear a path, and that means that we will see a game 3 here between Martin User and Tilmeri. I mean, I guess another option potentially that User might have had if he'd had access to something like a Collective Brutality, he could gain a couple of life, buy himself a turn that way, but it was going to be a big ask for him to make it through, even if he took one extra turn to be able to actually get there and get the full damage. We can see that Mary just taking a step away from the table there. He might be just double-checking something with a judge, or it may be that just, the lights of the feature match area getting to him a little bit, just taking a quick comfort break.
Yeah, you can always go to the to the restroom if need be. No problem at all, and the judges will make sure to keep track of the time and give you some extra time for the match afterwards.
Honestly, there's 29 minutes left on the clock for this. They've got through the first two games pretty briskly. Neither of these decks are known for hanging around, and neither of these players appear to be ones to take longer than they need to on decisions. And I have no concerns whatsoever about this matchup finishing in due course.
There is no way it's going to end in a draw. It's not the nature of the matchup. Games can go pretty quickly. But for Game 3, Martin will get to be on the play, which, as we discussed earlier, is going to be a big advantage.
And you can see here that Martin, unfazed, just carries on shuffling as his opponent is away from the table.
Yeah, well, what are you going to do? Maybe it's also a good time to discuss the sideboards for these players. As you see, I should get a look at some of the other players in the feature match area that we might see later on camera. Joel Larson in particular has been on he's been on a big winning streak since the start of this tournament, right?
Yeah, so he had 3 buys, which is obviously the best possible start that anyone can hope to have in a Grand Prix. But then his first 2 rounds of actual play, so rounds 4 and 5, he lost. That meant that even on day 1, he knew that he was going to have to win out just for the privilege of being able to play on day 2. He did that. Subsequently, he has not lost a match even in day 2, meaning that we've got to round 13 and he's still live for top 8. This is the reason that you keep on playing, even if you have a little bit of a rough start. Joel Larsson, who was the champion in the Swedish National Championships recently on a very strong national team featuring also Elias Watsfeld, they are going to be heading to the World Championships. And speaking to Joel, he said that he thinks that he's got a good team for that event. He's hopeful that Sweden's going to be able to put up some numbers there. But before that, he's hopeful that he's going to be able to continue that winning streak and maybe put up some numbers at this very event.
Yeah, he's he just keeps on winning. To give you a quick preview of the decks of the other players in the feature match area, Joel is playing white-blue control, one of the most popular choices among the pros with 3 buys. And his opponent there, Truls Munk, is playing white-blue spirits. A deck that exploits Supreme Phantom from the new core set. And you saw on the back table there Javier Dominguez on Jeskai control playing against Louis Deltour on white-blue control. So that's a good old Cryptic Command mirror match.
Yeah, we've been a little bit crafty in the order that we put these matches on camera here, Frank. We figured that this might be the one that was going to be the quick one, which would give us the opportunity to fit in the most other matches good and cleanly. And thus far, it has delivered on that promise, I think. Going into Game 3 here, even including that little comfort break, still a little over 25 minutes left on the clock. So looking forward to seeing how the decider of this one goes. Yeah, being on the play here, Martin User, a small favourite, I suppose, but it's all going to come down to the draws in these first few turns.
Yep, and maybe we'll see some of the sideboard cards doing some more action this game. I do believe that Martin boarded in the Grim Lava Monster. We actually saw it in the second game. I think I also saw an Engineered Explosives. So there's going to be a bit more interaction in these post-board games. You often see that in these creature-based matchups, that people are adding additional ways to deal with opposing creatures. Neither of the 2 decks really changed their overarching strategy, just some small updates.
All right, so these players drawing their opening 7s. Couple of lands, Burning Inquiry, couple of hollow one. Oh, so one hollow one Flame-Bladed Adept, and a Street Wraith. So I like the look of Martin User's hand quite a bit. On the other side of things, Auriok Champion, that a card that got boarded in, has protection from both red and black, meaning that essentially hollow one is the one creature that Auriok Champion is actually afraid of, and Auriok Champion will mean that Turtle Mary gets to gain life every single time a creature comes onto the battlefield.
It also blocks Gurmag Angler all day and dodges all of the removal spells that Martin has. Both opening hands seem pretty decent for both players.
A Burning Inquiry here might be pretty good if it can get rid of that Auriok Champion, because I can see the Champion being a bit of a pain in the neck for what Martin User's trying to get going on.
Possibly, but if Martin manages to keep his Hollow One in hand after playing the Burning Inquiry, then he still has a relevant threat. And, well, the Flameblade Adept, it does have menace, so it isn't trivially blocked by Auriok Champion.
Of course, getting the Adept into play first means that extra value off that Burning Inquiry before you worry about anything else. Ancient Ziggurat, the pickup there for Mary, who on turn 1 has an Aether Vial. Grim Lavamancer, the pickup there for Martin User. Already with one fetch land in the graveyard, not too difficult to imagine him being able to activate a Lavamancer essentially every turn of this game once it untaps in play.
I wonder how Martin is going to play this out. Is he going to play the Burning Inquiry first to maximize the probability that he still has Hollow One left over? Or does he want to commit Grim Lavamancer to the battlefield first and play Burning Inquiry after to ensure that he definitely has a Grim Lavamancer on the table? Both lines could have some merit.
Cycle Street Wraith to begin with, getting a little bit of extra information to work with on making that decision. There you can see the Grim Lavamancer, originally printed in Torment, with an Obstinate Familiar sat on his shoulders there. The Human Wizard can do all sorts of bother to opposing creature-based strategies.
Meanwhile, I think the reason why Martin didn't go for the Burning Inquiry on turn 1 is because it is still a bit risky, and by going for Flameblade Adept instead, he, well, let's say, makes the worst case situation still reasonable for him. Whereas if he had gone for turn 1 Burning Inquiry, discarded Hollow One, he would have been in a much worse shape, even though the upside was larger. And
with a Street Wraith here, also, he can guarantee that he's going to be able to get 3 cards discarded, keep that Hollow One in hand, and definitely be able to cast it. It's just a matter of what he does choose to throw away to this Faithless Looting.
Well, it's not going to be Hollow One, and I don't think it's going to be the Grim Lavamancer.
So a land and Engineered Explosives going away.
That seems reasonable. He still has another land left over, so he doesn't really need the third land. And explosives, well, you know, explosives on 1 can be useful against Aether Vial, but not when you have a bunch of 1 mana cost creatures as well.
Okay,
so far, advantage Juza, I'm pretty sure.
Grim Lavamancer and that Hollow One coming down. Wouldn't want to forget about him.
He cycles Street Wraith and played Faithless Looting, so Hollow One is free. Now Mary did have arguably the best turn 1 play for his deck in Aether Vial. But now he has to try to come back, and that Auriok Champion, if he plays it now, sure, it doesn't care about the Grim Lavamancer, but it won't be able to block Hollow One or Flameblade Adept profitably. Hollow One because it's an artifact, Flameblade Adept because it has menace.
There you can see the champion, originally from 5th Dawn. Protection from colours, not quite as powerful in Mirrodin block as it has been in almost the entirety of the rest of history of Magic, because there were so many colourless creatures at that point. Champion of the Parish, and then the champion of the Auriok variety. Ultimately deciding a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Parish more valuable than the 1 additional point of life that the opposite order would have generated. This way around, it does mean that double blocking the Flameblade Adept will at least kill off the Flameblade Adept.
It basically forces a Grim Lavamancer activation on the Champion of the Parish. And I think that Grim Lavamancer may do a whole lot of work for Martin Juza this game. Generally speaking, when you are the Humans player, you can rapidly go up to a 5/5 champion or a 5/5 Thalia's Lieutenant to start blocking the Hollow One. But Grim Lavamancer may prevent those those plans. Mary could still come back on the next turn if he goes land, Reflector Mage. He does have Reflector Mage. His hand is actually pretty good, but no third land yet. So that's going to be a big draw step for Mary on the next turn.
User here with a few options that he's pondering through.
Starting with the Burning Inquiry, also playing a land first in the hope of discarding that Phoenix. He hopes that one goes to the graveyard, because then it can return to the battlefield for just 1 red mana.
And he has cycled a Street Wraith as well this turn, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Gonna
well, bad news for Juza. He still is stuck with the Flamewake Phoenix in hand. That is the worst outcome for the Czech player.
Though to be fair, he has forced a discard of Auriok Champion and a Reclamation Sage that would otherwise have dealt with Hollow One.
Alright. Well, no reason to complain for him then.
Grim Lavamancer shoots down Champion of the Parish before it can grow too large, and 2 attacks here, no blocks available. So there's 4 cards been discarded this turn, so that's 9 damage coming through here. In spite of having had a good draw here, Tomeri is in all sorts of bother here.
Well, if he draws the land here, he can slam Reflector Mage, bounce, I don't know, maybe Hollow One. He's also adding something else to his board, gain some life with Auriok Champion in the meantime. And things will be a-okay for him.
Does not find a land this turn. Oh, sorry, he has a Horizon Canopy.
He does. Well, this game is actually pretty close. So, what do you bounce with Reflector Mage? See, if you bounce Hollow One, then you can potentially double block a Flameblade Adept with Reflector Mage and Auriok Champion. That seems fine. You're also gaining some life in the process, so you're in no real danger of dying to 4 Grim Lava Monster activations.
Yeah, it does go with the Reflector Mage here, of course. Hollow One goes away.
I like the play. Martin is able to cycle Hollow One if he so chooses.
Looks like he may have missed the point of life gain there, though.
No, he also had to take 1 damage from Horizon Canopy, so it balances out.
Ah, okay, yes.
And now what is Martin supposed to do? And he can attack with the Flameblade Adept, but that will just get double blocked. That doesn't seem too favorable. You can start activating Grim Lava Monster. He drew another Hollow One. Also has Flameblade Phoenix. I guess you can just play the Phoenix and attack with that one in the air. That seems reasonable. And then maybe hope to draw a discard spell on the next turn so that you can use it to cast 2 Hollow Ones then.
Yeah, this is a tough spot.
But if you cast Flameblade Phoenix, then you don't have mana for a Grim Lava Monster activation. And I guess activating it to kill Noble Hara could be useful. But then you're not really maximizing the mana you have available. When in doubt in those situations, I like to go for the play that just uses all of my mana. And, well, that is this one.
Well, it looks like Meri did miss a life point there because his Auriok Champion, I believe, does trigger on creatures coming into play on both sides. But if his life total is accurate at 6, then...
You are correct. It triggers off of any creature entering the battlefield.
Yeah, so...
But you always have to remember the trigger.
And the life points are going to be pretty relevant in this matchup. We're in a race. He's remembered it when he's played his own Mantis Rider here.
Well, Mantis Rider means that Meri has a blocker for the Phoenix on Martin's side. And also can get in for some damage in the process. So Meri played this out quite nicely and seems to be ahead on board, unless maybe Martin finds a discard spell that allows him to add 2 Hollow Ones to the battlefield on this very turn.
Yeah, a couple of hollow ones would definitely help quite a bit here. User will have to attack with that Flame Wake Phoenix. It lives in the red zone.
You know what would have been good for Mary on the previous turn? Meddling Mage on Hollow 1.
Ooh.
I mean, I guess it would just die to Grim Lava Monster, but still, combining Reflector Mage with Meddling Mage is one of the sweet plays that humans at least has access to, given its deck list.
So Mary blocks here. Now it does mean that Grim Lavamancer, if it so chooses, can finish off the flyer.
Seems reasonable to get that one off the board. Of course, the Phoenix has to attack, so there's no real choice there.
A couple of lands exiled to the Grim Lavamancer. A lot of fuel, it must be said, in this deck for Grim Lavamancer activations. Were it not for Auriok Champion, it would be reasonable to start thinking about just sending all of that fire straight to the dome.
And I think the pickup for Martin was Tessiger this turn, which he can play, as opposed to that pair of hollow ones. And Tessiger should also play the role of a good defender.
Yeah, sadly.
Right, Mary can attack with Auriok Champion on the next turn, but his other creatures are just gonna run into Tessiger.
Horizon Canopy there to draw a card, meaning that this Ether Vial potentially having more things that it can use. The Ether Vial not going to tick up at this point because 3, pretty much the high watermark for what humans has going on.
I think Mary picked up another Mantis Rider, which is a pretty big draw. It's another flyer that Martin cannot block. He also has Exalted with Noble Hierarch.
Champion of the Parish as well. He's going to be gaining life, he's going to be gaining counters. This is all coming up very nicely. Empty-handed magic now from Tomeri, but you know what? His board looking good enough that he may not mind that at all. Gets a hit in for 4 now, so just 2 points of life left for Martin User. It's going to have to be a great draw if the Hall of Famer is not going to find himself at 11-2 at the end of the very next turn cycle.
Yeah, this is going to be very tough. He needs to deal with Mantis Rider, which he currently doesn't have a blocker for. He also needs to deal with Auriok Champion, which even if the Mantis Rider were to die, could attack as a 2-2 with Noble Hierarch's Exalted ability, and Martin cannot block it because that's protection from black and red. So Martin has to do a lot of things this turn. Maybe if he drew a card draw spell and like hits the perfect cards, plays a hollow one as a blocker for the Auriok Champion, and then, I don't know, bolts the Mantis Rider. But even doing all of that will be difficult through Thalia, which also increases the cost of his spells. At this point, I can't really think of a sequence that gets him out of this, but we'll see if he can find one.
Activates Grim Lavamancer here. Alright, so essentially, rather than paying Thalia's tax on spells, he prepays for 1 spell's worth of tax by killing off Thalia with Grim Lavamancer.
Okay, I think he found Collective Brutality. So that can gain life to boost his life total back up to 4. But then to make sure that he doesn't die to an Exalted Mantis Rider, he also needs to kill the Noble Hierarch. Yeah, this is a sequence that actually keeps him alive for another turn if it weren't for the fact that Mary can just attack with all 4 of his creatures. And given that Martin only has 2 blockers, that's still not gonna do it. Or just the 2 unblockable ones. Yeah. Well, nice try though.
Yeah, worked his way through the options. His best option, still not good enough. And Tomeri picking up his 12th win now. 12-1 at the end of round 13. We knew that round 13 was going to be unlucky for someone. In that case, it was unlucky for Martin User. Humans continuing to show our dominance on the globe, or indeed on the plane of Dominaria and wherever we need to be. We will have more magic for you soon enough. Do not go anywhere. Right, more magic after these messages. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Prague here in the Czech Republic. Tim Willoughby and Frank Karsten bringing you all the action here from round 13. We've already seen Martin User dropping down to an X2 record, but these two players that we're jumping in with now, they're already on their second loss. So between Truls Monk and Joel Larsen, there is not much left to give. Larsen picked up his 2 losses early in day 1 and has been on a tear ever since with his blue-white control deck. Monk, well, he started off a little bit better, but his day 2, he's already got himself up to 2 losses, and he does not have any more losses to give if he wants to ensure his top 8 with blue-white spirits. Mausoleum Wanderer coming down on turn 1 for him. That one can potentially counter spells, but it can also just get powered up and attack in the air, and it may well be that for this spirits deck, attacking is the way to go.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this matchup plays out. The Spirits deck is a relatively recent addition to the modern format, mostly made possible, at least to make it competitive, that is, thanks to Supreme Phantom, the 2-mana Spirit Lord from the core set. And yeah, it is just a combination of flying spirits, some of which have disruptive abilities like Spell Queller or Mausoleum Wanderer, and with the tribal element that can set up some pretty fast clocks as well. Meanwhile, Joel is playing arguably the most powerful deck in Modern, at least according to many of the pros with 3 buys. It's a deck that has gained a lot over the course of the recent year, and after some time people perfecting the last few slots, it has been doing extremely well in Modern.
Now, one of the things to look out for in this matchup is normally blue-white control. If it's not got anything else going on, it can do cool things at the end of turn, drawing cards, potentially doing other bits and pieces with Snapcaster Mage. There's lots of instant speed creatures in the Spirits deck, and an early Terminus here. As it turns out, Monk decides to counter it with Mausoleum Wanderer rather than let his creature get put anywhere else. As things stand, though, he could have a creature at the end of turn here.
Yeah, many of the Spirit creatures have Flash. This was not the most exciting Terminus ever. Terminus, a card that was mostly added back to the deck after Jace came back. Because, well, brainstorming it back into your library, then casting it for 1 mana is a pretty sweet deal. Usually you're really happy to draw it in your draw step and sweep an entire board for 1 mana. Here it just traded 1 for 1. Also traded 1 mana for 1 mana. Still a fine deal. But I've seen the more impressive Miracled Terminuses.
Now, at this point, Monk has a few options for end-of-turn creatures. Goes for Nabelgast Herald to kick things off.
So that's a 2/1 Flash Flyer that when it enters, I think you get to tap something on the other side of the board.
Whenever any spirit enters the battlefield, you get to do that.
And you can only tap creatures an opponent controls. So basically, in this matchup, it is largely a 2/1 Flyer Flash for 3 mana, and yeah, that is mostly it. Not the most impressive, aggressive card. Many of these spirits are a bit underpowered by themselves, especially when, say, flying is not an issue, or when the opponent just doesn't have many creatures.
Now, Spell Queller was the other option that Monk had in terms of creatures that he could have played at the end of the turn, but given the option, Spell Queller just a much more powerful card if you can actually use its ability to exile a spell that's on the stack.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to play the Herald over Spell Queller. Now, Joel, end of turn, chooses to get rid of the Moorland Haunt, a land that can generate extra tokens when you exile creatures from your graveyard. Truls notably did not respond by activating it, thereby declining the ability to get a free token. He wants to keep the mana up for Spell Queller to, for example, counter, say, Jace the Mind Sculptor. At the same time, Spell Queller will also be on Joel's mind at this point, especially given that Truls is effectively representing it by not activating the Moorland Haunt.
Ancestral Vision, one spell that we know is going to get put on the stack relatively soon, but at that point, a Spell Queller being used to stop it might well in itself get stopped by some sort of removal spell. Looks like Monk might have something that he wants to do with the ability of Search for Azcanta on the stack.
Maybe he's asking if he can respond to the transformation trigger, but I think that is part of the whole upkeep effect. Yeah, it's just one triggered ability where you look, potentially put something into your graveyard and transform it. It's not another separate trigger.
This one of the ways that these control decks, just on the sly, get to have an extra land in play as well, which, for anyone that's played even a small amount of control, you'll know that that's one of the battles that you're looking to achieve.
Although this is not a typical control on control matchup. Truls definitely is the aggro player in this matchup. If we get to a very long game, then Joel's card advantage spells should eventually give him a large advantage. Joel is also the player with the creature sweepers. So Truls will try to win quickly. Even going as far as just playing a Spell Queller end of turn, just in an attempt to get an extra threat on the table. Don't always have to counter something with it.
That Nebelgast Herald, it's been nibbling through for a reasonable tick of damage here.
Still not the fastest clock. It does give Joel plenty of time. And Joel also doesn't really have to worry about any burn spells coming from a white-blue deck. So, still sitting at 12 life. I think Joel is feeling perfectly fine. Under no big pressure.
And along comes Rattle Chains, that another creature with flash, and it does mean that you potentially then have access to all of your spirits being able to be cast with flash.
So Snapcaster Mage could allow Joel to flashback the Cryptic command over there.
I don't know that Monk would mind that all too much, because he's got another copy of Spell Queller in hand.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. Could just let the Snapcaster Mage resolve and then counter the Cryptic command. It's not like the Snapcaster Mage does anything of relevance against his deck, because pretty much all of his creatures have flying.
Interesting, does go for the Spell Queller on Snapcaster Mage itself.
Well, one advantage is that if the Spell Queller dies, then Joel only gets back a Snapcaster Mage, not a Cryptic command.
Yeah, being able to say oust a Spell Queller, end up getting to treat that as a 1-mana Cryptic command might be a little dangerous. And lo and behold, Ancestral Vision means that now we're going to have a big hand here for Yol Larsen, assuming that he can resolve it. That was a search for Azcanta, Azcanta the Sunken Rune being used.
Yeah, and this is the turn where Joel has to do something. Ooh, he found a Supreme Verdict, I think. That is probably the best possible card he could have here, because, well, it cannot be countered. Although, I guess it doesn't really matter too much against Spell Queller.
Yeah, Spell Queller doesn't actually counter spells, it exiles them from the stack. Something that I know that people have been caught out by maybe when they're using the likes of Cavern of Souls to cast an important human, and then find that Spell Queller gets to trump that. Starting off small. A thumbs up there to opt.
Yeah, and the no counter ability, apart from that, is not so relevant against Spirits. It could help against Mausoleum Wanderer potentially, but the Spirits deck doesn't really play counter spells in the main deck. It's just lands, Ether Vial, Paths to Exile, and a whole bunch of Spirits.
So this a great test for whether or not there is a Spell Queller in hand, which would be the third one for Monk. All of those creatures go away. One creature gets to come back, though, that being Snapcaster Mage.
Extra value, too.
Yeah.
Looks like Joel does not even want to take the opportunity of, say, flashing back an Opt. He wants to keep Paths to Exile mana open to prevent any additional creatures from damaging him. Because many of these spirits do have flash. Not as Remorse for Cleric, but it's also a new addition to the format with a nice disruptive ability against decks that rely on the graveyard. Joel's deck, apart from a random Snapcaster Mage here and there, doesn't really need its graveyard to function.
So even though Larson at 6 and Monk at 18, it feels like Larson has navigated his way through the early and mid game fairly safely here. He's got an oust in hand if he needs to gain a little bit of life. He's now hitting that stage in the game where Planeswalkers seem like a much more reasonable thing to start deploying.
Yeah, this game Joel's deck just did what it was designed to do, more or less exactly what control decks are famous for. First take a couple of hits from the opposing creatures, eventually clear the board with some sweeper, meanwhile control the game with counterspells, and eventually draw some cards and lock up the game with, well, however you please. Could be Snapcaster Mage attacks, it could be some Planeswalkers, but once you take control and have all these cards in your hand, it is very hard to let go of that advantage.
So Snapcaster Mage, number 2, getting a Path to Exile that's able to deal with Supreme Phantom, that meaning that the amount of damage threatened by Larson doubled, and he does have a Celestial Colonnade as well, so if he wants to here, he can threaten a 2-turn clock on his opponent. Attack for 8, do so again, activate Azcanta the Sunken Ruin at the end of turn here.
Yeah, this is the spot where you can easily switch gears.
Finds a Cryptic Command, that will mean that if he wants to get into the red zone, he's going to be able to do so pretty effectively.
Yeah, he just untapped with Cryptic Command, mana up, and all kinds of control cards in hand. Azcanta still up. There's no way that Joel can lose this game. Jace, when he was unbanned earlier this year, spawned some worries from various people that Jace might be too powerful for Modern. He is being played in various decks, most notably this white-blue control deck, but he hasn't really dominated the format. A 4-mana Planeswalker in a format where you can easily lose the game by turn 3 is just fine, but not overly dominant.
So we got to see the end there. The point of concession from Trolls Monk is when he saw another copy of Cryptic Command being picked up by Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. That meaning that Joel Larson, a game up here, and Trolls Monk again on the play, kicking things off once again with Mausoleum Wanderer.
Yeah, Trolls is still the beatdown this game, so having access to a 1-drop that can get in for a bunch of damage is going to be huge, and that ability to sacrifice it to possibly counter something on the opposing side can also be quite useful.
Must be said, though, of course, this was exactly the start that he had in Game 1, and it didn't quite work out for him. And it looks like Joel Larson also has copies of Spellqueller in his grip now as we get into Game 2. These players have had the opportunity to do a bit of sideboarding. And Spellqueller, it's a really interesting form of counter magic in that it stops some of the things that no other counter magic will.
But in Game 1, Trolls didn't really have a fast draw. Here he does have the Supreme Phantom and quickly gets in for 3 damage total.
Yeah, it's going to take a bit of time for Larson to get anything going here.
Well, now Joel is under a reasonable clock, especially if Trolls can add another spirit to the battlefield on the next turn. Trolls may be trying to win before that Ancestral Vision comes off of Suspend.
After a little thought, Monk decides, yes, I do prefer to search up a land than to have my Mausoleum Wanderer go to the graveyard. Obviously, with the likes of Moorland Hort, it's not a completely foregone conclusion that doing things that way around is always going to be better, but at this stage in the game, the extra land, pretty valuable. Yeah,
and playing it main phase does make sense when you're playing against a deck that contains Rattle Changed. If Joel had allowed Trolls to untap and then plays the path to make sure that the Trolls would have 1 fewer land untapped on his turn, Trolls could have responded by flashing in a Rattle Chains to give it hexproof.
Well, Jogskull Captain, that's another way of giving spirits hexproof, and indeed pumping them all up. So that Supreme Phantom now attacking in for 2, and the Jogskull Captain a 3/3 flyer. It won't take too many more spirits to make this. Well, ignore literally everything that I was just trying to say. Terminus is enough to make sure that Trolls Monk's early board advantage, all for nothing. He plays a tapped Celestial Colonnade, he plays an Aether Vial, but doesn't have any more spirits for now, and Joel Larson still ticking down Ancestral Vision. Could it be that Joel Larson is about to win his 11th match, of which 8 in a row.
Well, seeing that terminus, I think he has a very good chance here. His luck stat must just be really high. Seeing that terminus on top at exactly the point where he needs it to stave off the beatdown. It is why you put him in your deck for these kinds of situations, but can only imagine that Larsen was feeling, well, after those first 2 losses, this tournament has gone my way in every single respect. Sometimes, well, everything just goes right.
I mean, I will state that right now Larsen has 2 copies of Terminus in hand, and he's going to have to find some land off this Ancestral Vision, because right now he's well behind on land on his opponent. Conveniently, when you draw 3 additional cards on a turn, not that difficult to achieve, but...
Meanwhile, Truls is just flooding out quite heavily. He didn't really have any follow-up after the Terminus, and drawing an Ether Vial so late also doesn't really help.
It's going to be the unkindest cut of all, of course, when Spell Queller comes down for Jol Larsen. Seems like a bit of a sort of traitorous move for the Spirits to be in the hands of the blue-white control player rather than the Spirits player. Spell Queller just getting aggro here, coming down at the end of turn, because Jol Larsen doesn't want to wait around, doesn't want to let his opponent draw into more cards. Finds a Baneslayer Angel on the top of his deck.
It's a nice compliment to the white-blue aggro team, I guess. Yeah, I don't think Truls can come back from this. Especially when Joel still has a handful of cards and Truls is just flooding out.
Larsen has decided that he doesn't just want to be the control, he also wants to be the aggro. No combo for him just yet, but you know what? 2 out of 3 ain't bad, as Meatloaf once said.
I like Truls' choice of not even going for the Noble Hierarch and the Collected Companies that many of these Spirit decks use, instead relying on Ether Vial and having a mana base that can support Mutavault, which is a Spirit, along with Moorland Haunt. But even with those card choices, I don't see him coming back. Not when there's a Baneslayer Angel getting into the red zone. Although he does get the some small victory by ambushing. It's not an Ambush Viper. It's a Snapcaster Mage.
Monk on 4, Larsen on 19, thanks to the lifelink on that Baneslayer Angel. Activates Field of Ruin on Moorland Haunt when currently no spirits in the graveyard.
Yeah, and he drew, I believe, a Rattle Chains. It can give him another chump blocker, but nope. I don't see this. I don't see this happening. Joel Larsen, experienced Pro Tour winner. He is not going to give this game out of hand.
Most recently, of course, also Swedish national champion. Victorious with a different breed of blue-white over at Swedish Nationals. Teferi in every format, why not? It's something that we saw a French team doing at Pro Tour 25th anniversary.
Now, if you're looking and seeing all of these white-blue control decks doing well at this event and wondering, well, how can I beat it? According to Ivan Vlog, who I spoke to earlier, decks like a Jund deck with Dark Confidant, Liliana, Bloodbraid Elf, that might be the type of deck that can get a good matchup against the white-blue control decks. Just an idea to consider. But as we've seen in Modern, time after time, the metagame is dynamic and tends to evolve.
Okay, so Celestial Colonnade activation, meaning that we did need this Rattle Chains just to give enough blockers, but Path to Exile, enough for the handshake. Jol Larsen advancing to 11-2. He lost round 4, he lost round 5, he's not lost any round since, and Jol Larsen still in the running to make top 8 here in Prague. Fantastic performance from the Swede, Pro Tour winner, and we got a little glimpse of exactly why that might be. We will have more Magic for you soon enough, but first, these messages.